There are rare pieces that have survived. They tell the story of time. I mean, I want the sense that time has passed to remain in the artifact. My name is Brian Howard. I'm the principal conservator for B.R. Howard & Associates. It's a company that we started about 30 years ago as a result of a need for conservators to work on large artifacts.
My name's Colin. I am the lead technician here. I keep my head wrapped around all the projects that we have going on in the shop and making sure that the ball keeps rolling.
My name is Braden Howard, and my role is kind of project manager. I spend a lot of my time putting bids together, RFPs, meeting with clients, doing research, and then when I'm not doing those boring things that I get accused of not wanting to participate in work, I do like to get my hands involved and work on stuff with our team, but I spend a lot of time running around.
Conservation that has been traditionally practiced has really grown out of the art world. It's dealing with collections in museums and certainly archaeological materials that are being recovered. So in that instance, those objects tended to be small just by nature. There was an opportunity to work on a large, actually it was a World War I tank. I think it was one of the very first large things we did. So all of a sudden, the facility had to match the need. So we actually enlarged our space to incorporate the need for this large artifact. And we had the good fortune of being out in central Pennsylvania where space was not an issue. Conservation training allows you to specialize in objects, paintings, and then book and paper. No time during that training did they really allow you to take on projects bigger than, let's say, this table. But the principles that we learned for consolidating paint, consolidating and repairing paper, stabilizing corrosion, polishing metals, certainly could be easily scaled up to incorporate the things that we now work on. What we have found in the field is that there are terms that get used regularly that are not necessarily defined by everyone in the same way. We think in terms of preservation, we talk about conservation, which is what we call ourselves, and then there's restoration. Everyone doesn't agree on those definitions. We don't necessarily agree ourselves all the time as about what we're doing. I see conservation as incorporating the other two. I see incorporating preservation and restoration. And we're always debating how far do we take something? How far do we go with this? I think you tend to want to be less invasive and you want to be more, let's preserve what's there.
I would agree with that. I think I like to try to keep the original story of the object as kind of front and center. I don't want any information to be lost. I'm in favor of preservation, stabilizing, improving the aesthetic without going far enough where it's a restoration.
And Colin comes out of your training is restoration through McPherson.
So I was trained in restoration, and to me that means getting rid of everything there and starting from scratch. Taking all paint off or all finishes off wood or completely tearing out the upholstery and just replacing. So I think a lot of things get lost when you do full restorations.
If we have a client who's brought an object to us or brought a car to us, they aren't going to want it returned looking like nothing's happened to it. They're spending money. There's an expectation that this is going to appear better than it did when you sent it to me. If I just simply did preservation, well, that means I could take it and put it in an archival box. I could make sure that the environment is stable. Those things alone can go a long way to keep an artifact preserved.
Everybody might have a whole different dialogue of what preservation means. Do they only care about the history and not the aesthetic of it? Do they care about more the aesthetic than the history? We want it to look good. We want it to function if need be.
And be stable and to be preserved in that
but we
state.
don't want to take away the historical integrity of any artifact.
So let me interject just a little bit. I see what you're saying, but a lot of what we do is we do have ongoing conversations with the client because we may find something or discover something in the process that may change our approach. We also make sure, because as conservators, we follow all of AIC guidelines. So if a client really wants us to do something that we feel is not appropriate, we may decide not to do it.
AIC guidelines, by the way, is American Institute for Conservation. Some of the code of ethics are the principles of documentation, which we are mandated to do in any project we have. We have reversibility, which is a term that's not used in restoration. If we're going to repaint something, or touch up areas of paint, they don't care if that paint comes off. When we retouch something or put a coating on it, we have to make sure that we can remove that lacquer or that coating and not damage the original that is underneath.
We had a client that wanted to keep everything original and stable, but they also wanted to drive a vehicle that was historic in an annual parade. And the problem was the original leather was so friable and brittle, if you sat on it, it would continue to fall apart. We treated it as a typical conservation, preservation approach, but then we also reproduced the leather interior seats so they could remove them, put accurate reproductions in to drive it, but then when it's displayed, put the original seats back on. So there's multiple ways to do things.
If an object happens to be in a museum collection, our responsibility is then to talk with the curator. They're going to understand how it's going to be exhibited. They understand perhaps its history better than we do. Our dialogue with them allows us to tailor our treatment to their expectations. And then it always comes down to, well, yeah, we can achieve this, but how much time is it going to take to achieve this? And then once we start talking about how much time, then they want to know how much is it going to cost. So we are practical people. We're not born, our inheritance is going to be pretty small, and so are theirs. But so we've always had to find a way to do things in a cost-effective manner, and it's always in the forefront of our mind. But that conversation of what can be done, what needs to be done, what we can do, all it's tied back to the curator in a museum. If there's no museum curator who doesn't have that expertise, then often the research, the historical research, and the testing falls on us to explain it to the client. Many things should be restored because they've been so badly damaged or neglected. So restoration certainly is a viable option. But there are rare pieces that have survived that just, they tell the story of time. I mean, I want the sense that time has passed to remain in the artifact. If something's handled repeatedly or paint is worn, on one of the Edison cars, you could see where his hand constantly went over this part of the vehicle. I want that to remain. That's a significant person in history who used that vehicle, and also just the wear that sometimes occurs gives you an idea of how something was used. Once it's repainted, that's lost. It's pretty, it's much better looking, and it's probably, even if it's an accurate restoration, I think it's lost something. So I'm trying to make sure that these artifacts are improved visually, that whenever possible they're stable, corrosion is stabilized, paint's not falling off, leather's not deteriorating anymore. But I don't want it to be the object or the car that Brian Howard did. I want it to be the car that Thomas Edison's son drove.
My job's important to me because these things have a story. It's the story, I think, that gives them their life. Then I feel related to the object.
I think it's just important to make sure that the artifact lives on to continue to tell a story to future generations.